Welcome to the Covenant Podcast. Austin McCormick here. The Covenant Podcast exists to equip listeners with theological content from a 1689 Baptist perspective. We're on the Man of God Network, brought to you by Covenant Baptist Theological Seminary. And in this conversation, I have the privilege to talk with Pastor Conrad. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Austin.
Yeah, it's the first time I've ever got to chat with you, so it's my privilege to have this conversation with you. And for our first question in the short interview, can you just introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, well, my name is Conrad Mbewe, as you've already heard, and I pastor Kabwata Baptist Church in Lusaka, Zambia. I've been pastoring there since 1987, and part of the other activities that I do back home, I'm a newspaper columnist. I also am a founding chancellor of the African Christian University. I edit Reformation Zambia, and so on. But mainly it's pastoring Kabwata Baptist Church. I'm married. I have 6 children and 6 grandchildren.
Yeah, thank you for that. And right now, obviously, you're here in the States. Yeah. I think you've been doing several things since you've been here, but during this interview, last night, tonight, and tomorrow at some point, you are one of the plenary speakers for the Covenant Conference. This year's theme is How Then Should We Worship? So would you spend the rest of our time in this conversation before we conclude telling our audience a little bit about what you've been speaking about in these messages?
Yeah, well, all I've done is to expound John in chapter 4, the conversation between our Lord Jesus Christ and the Samaritan woman, where he initially makes the statement that the way in which worship has been up to this point, an hour is now coming when that will be obsolete. So I took a bit of time to basically show what was going to become obsolete. The worship, especially that was in the Jewish tradition that God had prescribed, but also that which was being developed under the Samaritans, which God had not prescribed, but they had come up with, and it had become a tradition. So Jesus was not engaging in debate between the two. He was basically simply saying, that's coming to an end shortly. And then the other message is really simply pointing out what Jesus means when he says that God is spirit, and that he desires those who worship him to do so in spirit and truth. So that aspect, what exactly does it mean, and how does that represent the new covenant worship? And then thirdly and lastly, it's a statement that Jesus makes which appeals a lot to me when he speaks in terms of the Father seeking this kind of worshippers. In other words, there are all kinds of worshippers that are there in the world, and simply because there is something about the way God has made us as human beings that causes us to realize that we are not the ultimate, that there is a creator, there is a divine benefactor, and that we owe him worship. And so human beings have come up with one form of worship or another. And now the Lord is speaking in terms of God seeking a certain kind of worshiper. And it is one who worships in spirit and truth. But it's just that aspect of God seeking, God desiring. That this is something that fits into something of the very nature of God. And that was my very last message at this conference.
Thank you. And we appreciate you being willing to come. And thank you for the purpose of our short recording of the Covenant Podcast for summarizing your talks. So thank you, brother.
Thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.
And to our listeners, we wish you grace and peace.